We're going to talk about proposal review process. So we've done a lot of content work yesterday and today, and now we're going to do a little bit of logistics work, and then we're going to give you some time to really start to plan on some of these changes and that you want to work on before you and while you develop your proposal. So we're going to move to, and we're still developing it, so I don't know exactly what it looks like. We have some paper for you to look at today, but this is going to be an online process. And we want your feedback on how it works. So as you're doing this, know that this is the first time we're trying something this way, so we'll want your feedback on it. The initial review is going to be with an iterative cycle of feedback. So what I mean by that, and what we mean by that, and we're going to show you the schedule in just a second, is our expectation is that we probably are going to provide you with feedback. We've got to recruit some reviewers, but this idea we've been talking about thinking about people critiquing writing and being comfortable with that. Well, I think the same is true for a proposal process. We hope that the reviewers will be in a place where they can give you feedback, thoughts about what you're doing. Maybe they see a gap. And so instead of just saying, yes, you're good to go, they actually say, well, we think this part of your program is super strong, and maybe this is an area where you could do some more thinking. But it meets the bar of what we need for approval purposes. So we hope that there will be some feedback for you as a part of this process. We're also, therefore, going to have opportunities for resubmission. Now, that's not wildly different than what we did with middle grades and special populations. So if you do not, on your first submission, get an approval decision, you will have additional opportunities to submit. I've been asked the question of, are we going to have to do this repeatedly? Is this, something that'll become an annual requirement? And the answer to that is no. This is a one-time review process for literacy, with the exception that it'll always be included in your comprehensive review process, because these will be a set of standards to which we expect you to address during that comprehensive review process. So timeline, and I know that this probably gives you some anxiety. It gives us some anxiety as well. I think both the commissioner and the board were clear, though, that our K-12 students can't wait. That we need to make this change, and we need to do it with some level of urgency. So, therefore, the first proposals are due on April 15th. Hopefully that's not news to you. Hopefully you've seen that date before. We have communicated it, I think, through the EPP update before. So, yeah, make sure you're getting on that and reading it. So what we'll do then is we'll work with some reviewers, and I'm going to talk about reviewers in a moment. And then we will notify institutions on or before May 30th about the status of that first review. And then following that notification, you'll only have a month to make revisions. Now, as you might have experienced with middle grades and special populations, if they're tiny little revisions, we'll probably just do something real quick with you. It won't have to be a big formal, or if we have a clarification question or something like that. But if you do need to actually go back to the drawing board and address something substantial, your date will be a month later. And the reason I'm talking about this so long is because that means that you probably need to think about calendars and scheduling and who's going to be around and able to do work at that point in time. So the second round of revisions will be due on June 30th. And then hopefully we won't need this last one, because look how short that cycle is. Crazy short. Hopefully all of that would just be little stuff like clarifications. Because what we're trying to do is get you ready to implement in the fall. My main goal today is for you to be aware of this timeline. So if you have any questions about it or feedback, we're going to have a survey at the end of the day. Please share that with us. But I really don't think this timeline is going to change much, so I don't want to be unclear about that. So we also need reviewers. If we want to have a substantive review and give you feedback, we need people reviewing this who have deep knowledge in literacy. And so we need to recruit some folks to do that. And we want ed prep faculty to do it, and we also are going to try to recruit some K-12 faculty. And in some of our other sessions, people said, oh, well, we work with literacy coaches. Can we nominate them? And I think the way that we all do it is not have you nominate them, but make sure that you know that you can certainly send this communication to them when we are in full recruiting mode, which it's November, we are recruiting. These literacy convenings were our first recruiting effort. So think about if someone on your campus would be willing to engage in the review process. What we are anticipating is that we will have applications that are going to be due in December, and then reviewers will be selected and then notified in January, and reviewer training will take place in February. Again, to be very transparent, reviewer training will likely require 1 day in person in Nashville. So just as you're thinking about it, that will be an expectation. I do think that we are going to have some compensation. I don't know how much it is going to be, so just keep that also in your mind. Oh, I do know what I wanted to say. So we will follow a process that does some sort of probable, I think we'll use 2 scores to score reviews and then have some sort of consensus reaching process. I mean, our goal will be to be very consistent across proposals in terms of how we give feedback and approval decisions. And I know that's probably goes without saying, but I just wanted to make sure I verbalized that to you. Any questions about timeline or questions about reviewers?
After implementation, what type of data collection will you all require us to do?
That's a great question. This came up, I think, in West Tennessee as well. So we haven't talked explicitly about what components of data collection will be required later. I think that it goes without saying that we will always have, how folks are doing on a reading praxis exam, and that's something I want to mention. Probably continue to have questions from your partners about how well they feel that your candidates are prepared, and probably explicitly asking them how well they feel prepared in the area of literacy. As a part of Standard 5, you always have to think about your candidate assessment system, and is your system, you're collecting data about your candidates along the way. Are you using strong assessments? Are they giving you good information about your candidates? Are you using that data to improve your programs? But I think that's a part of what, we should be doing sort of provider-wide. Are there any other specific component of that? Okay. A few things that I want to talk about. There is a half sheet of paper in your folder. It's titled Day 2 Literacy Network / Wrap-Up Exit Slip. We want to tell you about this now because you probably want to have a conversation with your colleagues, because we're asking you for some contact information. So number 1 is to provide names and email addresses for each faculty member who should receive communication about the proposal and review process. So anybody that you want to engage with this or get communications from us about this, like reminders of deadlines or, actually here's the application when it's ready to go out, those people should be listed there. And then number 2 on this sheet is provide the name and email address of 1 faculty member who will be your representative for the 2018-19 EPP Literacy Network. And we're going to finish our day talking about the Literacy Network, but we wanted to go ahead and let you start thinking about who that representative will be. The last thing I want to share with you about logistics is it's off topic a little bit, but I want to make sure it's on your radar that the State Board of Education has convened a task force to look at the current reading praxis exam that we use. And they also, at the same time, looked at the reading exam that's offered through Pearson. That task force came to some recommendations, and Annie can talk about them specifically a little bit, but I just want this on your radar that the board is having a conversation about whether we have the right reading test. In addition to those two tests, something else that's on the table is developing a Tennessee-specific reading test. So I just want you to, I don't have any information about what's going to happen. We don't know yet. But I did want to key you into the fact that conversation is happening. On November 20th, the board will have a subcommittee meeting. The board now has a subcommittee on licensure and preparation. We expect that this topic will be a significant part of the conversation that day. It'll be live streamed just like their meetings always are, but it'll also be recorded so you could watch it later if you wanted to. And we will certainly share any significant things that come of that conversation through the EPP update. The date of the State Board Subcommittee meeting is November 20th. All right, so we're going to shift gears and start looking at the proposal.
We asked you to take a look at the document that was in your folder. It's entitled, at the top it says Introduction. This is our proposal draft. And we're going to walk through this document today and ensure that you understand the expectations of what each component is asking, give you a chance to ask those questions, and even to provide your feedback. As Amy had said before, this is a draft proposal. However, given our very ambitious timeline with proposals being due in April, we understand the sense of urgency of giving you that final draft, but we wanted to give you a chance at the convening today, either in this discussion or afterwards as you're filling out the evaluation survey, an opportunity to provide your feedback on the proposal. So we welcome that discussion today as we're walking through things. So this document, it says Introduction at the top. The top portion of that is essentially a lot of the information that Amy went over. I do want to call attention to the first footnote at the bottom of the first page where it begins, early and elementary endorsements include. As a reminder, this is a proposal for all initial licensure, early, elementary, and special education programs. But that footnote describes that in more detail because we had some questions about that regarding West Tennessee, as we all have different programs. So if you look down, we're defining which endorsements that will require this proposal process, okay? One thing to keep in mind as we're talking this through is as you're drafting this proposal process, we invite you to think strategically about the preparation of your candidates across these programs. And if it makes sense, say for example, your early and elementary candidates go through a very similar literacy sequence or program, then it makes sense to complete one program in that regard, okay? So we're asking for you, is that what you were gonna say? You said one program. One proposal, thank you. So we're asking you to make your best judgment in that regard. So, but it'll differ. We can't give you the magic number of we're going to require this many proposals per institution. It just depends.
This is only for initial licensure programs. However, you need to think about when you're thinking about proposal submission, does your job embedded elementary program look sufficiently different from your undergraduate student teaching elementary program that they're going to require separate proposals? However, maybe your early childhood and your elementary job embedded programs are so similar that you can put them on one proposal. Martin is working right now on developing what we believe are the full list of initial licensure programs you have, broken down by clinical pathway and undergraduate versus post-bac. So we're going to share with you, here's what we believe you currently offer, and we're expecting proposals from you that address these programs so that we can make sure that we clean up any outdated information before the proposals. We don't want you to get to April 15th and tell us, oh, you know, we don't do that program anymore and we were expecting to get something from it. So just want to make sure we're all up to date on that.
Okay, I'm going to walk us through this document, and as you have questions, please feel free to ask them. This proposal is broken down into two components, right? The first component we're calling this matrix here. This is component one, part one, okay? The second part are the series of questions that are asked afterwards. So let's talk about this matrix table first. As you can see in front of you and on the screens, on the left-hand side, we've indicated literacy course/module, another literacy course/module, and then non-literacy specific courses. What the expectation is here on this matrix is that you'll replace that language with the name of the course that will have that will incorporate these particular EPP literacy standards, okay? So where it says literacy course/module, you'll take out that language and you'll put in the literacy specific course that will be implementing those standards, okay? Now when it says non-literacy specific course, we've been having conversations about how these standards can really apply in multiple areas or span across your program. So if there's a particular, maybe like a social studies or an assessment course that you're seeing connections being made with these particular EPP standards, that's what we would expect you to write under that non-literacy specific course. And we've had some debate about what categorizes as a non-literacy course, what categorizes as a literacy specific course. Make your best judgment on there. This table will expand, so if you have many courses that address these standards, just keep adding rows. Okay, this does not assume that there's only 4 places or 4 courses that you can put those or implement those standards in. Okay, let's look at the first column over here where it says EPP Literacy Standards 1.5. We got another kind of introduction to our standards when I walked through them yesterday, and so I want you to keep that conversation in mind. So as you remember, there are 5 major EPP literacy standards, 5 big buckets. The first one is all about content. Put that one to the side for a minute and think about EPP standard 2, 3, 4, and 5. All of those 2, 3, 4, and 5 are broken down into indicators, right? 2.1, 2.2, right? 3.5, et cetera, et cetera. The expectation in here is that all of those EPP literacy standards down to the indicator level for 2 through 5 will show up on this matrix, okay? They may fall in more than one course. So for example, if you have a literacy methods course listed up here, and then you also have an assessment course, and standard 4.4 fits in both of them, go ahead and list it more than once, okay? Now standard 1 also has indicators, right? 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, but even underneath that standard 1.1, 1.2, there are even more bullets, right? The expectation is not that you have to do 1.1.1. Does that make sense? It would just get a little unwieldy, I think, okay? However, all standards and their indicators must be represented and shown alignment up here with your courses. Let's go ahead and look at the next column, which we've written key assessments. Some feedback we got already from the other convenings that key assessments can be a little bit confusing of language. What we mean here is candidate assessment, okay? So what candidate assessments will be assigned and be used to demonstrate the candidate's proficiency with these particular standards, okay? If you use, for example, I know all of you are going to be asking about EdTPA, if you use an early childhood handbook or the elementary literacy handbook or the elementary literacy and math handbook, and there's alignment with those particular standards, you can list the EdTPA portfolio up here, okay? For more than one course, right? I mean, some of you have preparation for that or really doing a lot of things in regards to that EdTPA assessment where it may apply in multiple places. You can list it as many times, okay? A bit of clarification, all we want is the indicator, the standard in the indicator, like 1.1 up here, 2.1, just the number, okay? With the assessment, all we want is just the title, whatever you're calling it, EdTPA elementary literacy, okay? if you have a particular assessment, and we would expect that you would have more than just the EdTPA listed under candidate assessment. We would expect that you have multiple measures that you're using to assess whether or not candidates are proficient in these with these standards. So again, all we need is whatever that title is, okay? It could be an assessment that you design with your colleagues. Whatever its title is, just listed in that table. Because what the subsequent questions will then ask is for you to go into detail and describe those particular assessments. Does that make sense?
If we have a wide range of assessments varying from instructor to instructor, should we list those all on there, or does this need to be a common assignment?
So, are you using an assessment to verify that a candidate possesses knowledge and the ability to implement those standards? If you are, it's a part of your proposal. And one of the questions that you might get back is, if they're not common assessments, how is the EPP as an institution confident that those assessments are telling you what you need to know? So this is, I heard Mark behind me. I'm going to tell on you. I heard you say something about CAPE. And I think that we aren't asking you to verify for us that your assessments are validated. And part of the reason for that is because I think we all understand where we are in that space. But if you're using an assessment as your justification for verifying to the department for a purpose of a license that somebody has knowledge and skills, then you should be able to justify why those assessments are being used. Now, I think on the flip side, this doesn't mean you have to include every single little quiz that you use. So we all know that there's a lot of more sort of formative assessments. So I think in here, we are looking for those big, like, I think about it like that unit task, right? We're not looking for every little daily task level thing that you do. But if your big key assessments are different across it, that'll have to be explained in your proposal. And that might be a reason why a graduate proposal might be different than an undergrad proposal, even if the course sequences are the same. If the candidate assessments are significantly different, then you might. However, if a graduate course has an assessment that is more related to the fact that it's a graduate course, like it's related to research and not addressing a standard, then that wouldn't be a key candidate assessment.
So you mentioned that all the numbers should be on the left side. So should every standard and substandard be connected with some sort of assessment?
Yes. Yes.
And I think we feel, and again, this is part of the reason we want to share this process with you, for you to give us feedback if we're off base on something. But how else do you know that your candidates have mastered all of those standards? Because that's the expectation, is that they are prepared and ready to implement the skills and knowledge related to those standards.
So I'm looking on page 29 under the 5.4, 5.5, 5.6. It says, should be prepared to participate in professional learning about literacy that is job embedded, builds trust, and empowers teachers and others. How do you show that? It just seems to be a challenge that doesn't seem very measurable to me.
Right. So that's a good question. So there's a couple ways to answer that. One thing I just want to bring to the forefront too is to not discount clinical experiences and the assessments that may be associated with that. So if your candidates are out in the field and they're engaging in professional learning in some regard, and there's a way that the supervisor who's observing has a chance to be able to either debrief or observe that collaboration within within that observation, then that might provide evidence. So I guess the point here is that we don't want to discount clinical experiences, and maybe because some of that may not be prevalent in just the courses, right? We might be seeing evidence of some of this outside within clinical experiences. The other part of that too is to get you thinking about should be prepared. There's an opportunity on question number 6 that talks about professional learning, and we'll talk about number 6, all the questions here in a moment, but number 6 asks you to think specifically about the ways that candidates engage in professional learning about literacy throughout the program. So I'd be thinking also about, and maybe some programs need work in these areas too, but to be thinking about what is professional learning, how does it really translate from the beginning of the program and then throughout? What are we doing to engage students in that professional learning and that collaboration? So if there's particular activities that will show some of that demonstrated, so this is pretty preliminary, right? Should be prepared does not have language that's so strong that says select and implement, right? That's a very causal relationship. You should be able to show evidence with that. So there'll need to be some evidence that you can provide that shows that the candidate is developmentally prepared to be thinking in these ways, to be engaging in professional learning, to be engaging in collaboration. Is that helpful at all?
I guess I'm just thinking about measurement, like if we have to list an assessment for all of these indicators, what would be an example assessment for an indicator?
So I think that this is, first of all, this is part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation. So I think that you can give us feedback on that in the evaluation this afternoon. But I also think that there are assessments that are, having a candidate perhaps toward the end of their experience reflect on what might I do to engage in continued professional learning related to literacy. And hopefully, as a part of that, what you would see is that they would identify opportunity, and thinking about, you're going to go into a school next year, maybe a goal would be to find somebody that you think in your school is a master teacher. Hopefully your principal will assign you a mentor, and then thinking about collaborating with those educators. I could also think about something related to analyzing how they did on their own EdTPA, for example. And Georgia's doing this systematically, and I think it's really interesting. They're having candidates prepare professional learning plans that they can take with them to their new schools. And I think so I think some of this is creative and not necessarily an assessment of do they know, but are they ready? Do they know what it would look like to engage in ongoing professional learning in collaboration with their colleagues? But I think that your comment about measurement is really valid, and we should be thinking about that. I know there are a couple other questions and comments. Sandy?
I was just going to say, I've seen programs where if they've attended professional development activities, either in schools or conferences, or if they hold professional membership in organizations, sometimes that can be submitted. Sometimes candidates will put that in portfolios as evidence of interest in professional development that goes beyond the school preparation, the continuity.
Something that Tennessee Tech does, and I know we all do it, are the disposition, we call it disposition statements or disposition reviews. And one of the areas in there, it has that the candidate, I don't remember exactly how it's written, but can communicate both orally and in written appropriately or whatever. So that would meet that one standard that you're talking about, I think. My question is, and you may have answered this, and if you did, I apologize, but when we're listing the courses here, are we listing all of the courses on the student's program of study, which includes the gen ed, like the Englishes and the writing?
You'll include only the courses that will have EPP literacy standards embedded. Does that make sense?
So, because we talked yesterday about that, working with the English department.
Right.
Departments.
Yeah.
So now we're saying no?
No. If there are some of those standards, if we're revising the programs and say one of those earlier written or, advanced composition courses will embed some of these EPP literacy standards, you would include that here. We don't necessarily need the entire program of study if there are courses in there that don't have EPP literacy standards embedded.
Think about it too, like where are you being explicit? Because there are going to be, literacy is going to be embedded everywhere, but are you in your assessment course explicitly working to address one of these literacy standards, sort of not just a bystandering thing that's happening, but it's an explicit, deliberate approach to making sure your candidates are meeting all of these standards. That's not, it just happens to come up, right? So that's why we're saying it doesn't have to be everything.
Okay, so let's look at the questions that are on the next page, so in the part 2 of the proposal. And the first question asks for what literacy courses and program content are required for all candidates. So this seems a bit redundant from the matrix. However, what this does is it asks you to put these courses in a table that articulates the sequence if you have one. So for example, if the candidates take this particular course in fall of junior year, then you'd list that one first. And then what if they take another class in the spring of junior year, then that one would come next. So some sort of table that demonstrates that sequence so we can understand what, when courses are taken and when they're not. Good question came up about in West Tennessee if courses are not sequenced. We will ask for you to articulate the rationale for why courses are not sequenced, because we understand that some of the programs don't have a particular sequence. So we'll ask for that rationale. Below that table, we'll ask for you to list the title and a brief description of each course and field experience if it has one. So that would be just like your program of study, that blurb that you write after your course, you would include that language underneath the table on question 1, okay? And then if there's a particular field experience associated with or part of the sequence that engages candidates in literacy practice, or a clinical experience that you would imagine candidates would be performing or showing expectation of these EPP literacy standards, you would include that within the table on number 1 as well. Does that make sense? Can that also be field experience? Yes. So number 2 asks, provide the title and description of any non-literacy courses that address literacy in any significant way. And what you'll do there is just include those courses within that sequence that you've started in question number 1. Any questions about that?
Do you see that being bulleted?
Do I see that being bulleted?
Remember, we're going to be online.
Yeah.
And this is what we have right now for you is a draft. So we're going to try to, I didn't say this earlier, maybe it's helpful now. We're going to try to finalize this based on your feedback and get it out to you by December 1. And so by December 1, you'll know if we have specific requirements for how things are presented.
Yep.
And if we don't explicitly ask for it, then I think it is absolutely your judgment call. I think we are trying to take feedback. So you saying that makes me think, well, should we, do something related to that? The other thing I want to add while we're in the middle of this is we're also developing a rubric that will go with each of these questions. So think about a lot of the things that we've talked about in teaching literacy in Tennessee. We're going to be asking how well those things are reflected in here and how well they build to a candidate being able to design a unit. Do they reflect collaboration with partners? And so although the questions here are pretty program oriented, the rubric, and we'll be sharing that as not December 1. I'm sorry I said that. It won't be December 1, it'll be early January. When we share the rubric, we'll have some of those types of things embedded in it.
You're going to give us a document that's online that we will be filling that in terms of submitting the proposal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that section
Version of this.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so that section on the side where it reads courses, that would be a space where we can actually.
That's right. Question number 3 asks you to think about the assessments that you listed in the matrix on the right-hand side and to describe those assessments, including evidence for aspects of how these assessments are aligned with teaching literacy in Tennessee. The assessments should include both progress monitoring and benchmark assessments. So again, if you list EdTPA on there, that's one that you'll describe and talk about the specific evidence that you'll be collecting to ensure that your candidates have a deep knowledge of those standards.
And teaching literacy in Tennessee is not just that spiral-bound book. It is the approach in general, all of those resources that are available.
The 4th question says, describe how the clinical experiences are designed to build on each other in ways that support candidate developmental understanding of teaching literacy. What are the specific outcomes candidates will demonstrate that will indicate these experiences are developing or supporting that developmental learning? So one way to be thinking about this is if you have an early field experience, that 2 of them that build on each other, that then culminates into a student teaching experience. Maybe what you're describing here is, why is this field experience first, and then what are they doing in the second one that builds on the first one, right? And why are those appropriate to be doing before student teaching in regards to literacy and supporting the candidate's understanding of teaching literacy? Question.
Can this also include integrating literacy? It says teaching literacy. So if we think about our content block, field experience, and then residency, some of them are not in a literacy class, but they're in a content area, math, science, social studies. So can it include integrating
That's
literacy?
a great point, and yes, I like that language. I think maybe we should even write that on our chart too, since not all of them are in a place to be teaching yet, but they're thinking or planning or co-creating in some particular ways. Okay, question number 5 asks, describe the outcomes candidates should demonstrate to show how they view student difference as assets. And we got a great question from an earlier convening. We listed cultural, linguistic, and ability. Is that an extensive list? No. Should these in particular be addressed? Yes, and called out. Another question that we had, should we be calling out specifically what we're doing to demonstrate student differences in regards to cultural differences as assets? Yes, and then linguistic differences as assets? Yes, as ability differences as assets? Yes. Is it an extensive list? No. But we're really thinking critically about these 3 particular areas, okay? Okay, last question. Describe the ways in which your candidates engage in professional learning about literacy throughout the program. And so, as you may have noticed, one thing I want to point out with this question is that professional learning is defined by the 5th standard. So what you'll notice in the standards, professional learning is articulated in that language. That's the definition that we're using with this particular question. And so in what ways are they demonstrating professional learning throughout the program? So make sure to articulate that development. What we're going to spend about the next hour doing is we're going to, in a moment, break you into smaller groups, the same small groups you were in yesterday. So if you're upstairs in room 200, we'll have you go back up there. If you're down here, we'll keep you down here, and I'll show you that slide in just a moment. You're going to have 2. Tiffany, did those go out yet? Okay, Tiffany's going to hand you a document here, and we have 2 things to be thinking about as you're working within your groups. We gave you a lot to think about with this proposal, and you now have a timeline. So if you're thinking about what's today? November 9th. And a due date of our proposals of April 15th, 2018. And if you do some backwards mapping or backwards planning, what we want you to do is think about the conversations you had yesterday and today about potential changes you want to be making, and thinking about it in relation to that timeline, and start creating some actionable next steps. Meaning, I feel like you would be successful at the very least if you walked out of here saying, we need to meet with these people on these days to be doing these particular things. What Debbie and Tiffany just passed out is a tool that you can choose to use. It's an action planning template. We found that some of our participants at the previous convenings were able to take this document. It was helpful for them thinking through, oh yes, we need these people in the room to be doing these particular things by this date, with our overall goal being this. So feel free to use this action planning template as you're thinking about that. That's going to be one task we ask you to be thinking about in the next hour. And then the second task is related directly to the proposal again. And what we invite you to do, again, we really we value the feedback that you've already given us. And one additional thing we're going to ask is for you to be thinking about how you would weight specific components of this proposal. Amy, do you want to talk a bit about that chart and what our ask is?
So we're going to give every provider a set of 9 colored dots, 3 green, 3 yellow, 3 red. And with your group, we would like for you to decide how you want to allocate your dots. So if you were going to weight something as most important, most critical for a successful literacy program, which of these things would you allocate your green dots to? I mean, you've all created assessments before, you know what we're doing. And then red dots would be those things that you think maybe are the least valuable piece of information. That has helped us gain insight into where to continue to build out and whether there are pieces of this that maybe are unnecessary. I think it's important for us. We don't want to have proposals that ask you to do a lot of work that's not highly valuable. So once you've had this time, when you're coming back into the room, if you'll come over here and physically put your dots onto the chart. In the other regions, we got the question about whether you have to use all of your dots, and you don't have to use all of your dots. So, you know, they're yours. Do with them as you wish. Any questions about that task? Great.
So again, two tasks as we are working in our teams. Task 1 is to think about that action plan and those elements of change and revision that you're thinking about in relation to getting the proposal submitted by April 15th, and then the weighting of the components on the proposal. And what we'll do is we'll break you into the same rooms that you were in before. We'll have department folks across helping answer questions or prompting whatever support we can offer. And we'll come back into this room and share out a few things that are your big takeaways from that conversation. We'll convene back here about I'll say about 2:55. Is that uber precise? 2:55. Okay, so we'll have our meeting with teams, and this will be up to you, but if there's just a singleton from your institution and you want to maybe work with another group that's in there, another institution that's in there, that's your prerogative, and or if you want to just be meeting in individual teams to get some work done, you can do that as well. I'll leave that up to you in the individual rooms. Okay? All right, we'll go ahead and break out and then be back here about 2:55.